Welcome to part 2 of the section 6 notes over primate evolution. We've already covered the evolutionary relationships between humans and other primates. In this video, we need to be able to recognize the names and relative ages of extinct hominids and also to summarize the events and forces that shaped human evolution. So when we went through this family tree before, I talked about how we're the only remaining hominid. We're the only human species left out of a group of species. And so we're going to talk about those species and what they would have contributed to human evolution. The first species we need to talk about actually wasn't human. We didn't consider it human, but it's really, really close. It's that link between hominoid and hominid. The specimen was called Lucy. She was from the genus Australopithecus. She was an Australopithecine, and she's a very famous fossil because she's the very first bipedal primate species that we've been able to identify. She had a small brain, a hodgepodge of hominoid and hominid features, which means that she showed some mosaic evolution. She's a little bit hominoid, a little bit hominid, but the most important part of her was that we think that she was walking on 2 feet. And that's how we kind of distinguish ourselves from the rest of the primates. Right? That was the first step in our evolution to being what we are today, was to start walking on 2 feet, and that completely changes things. So we're pretty sure that she walked on 2 feet even though we've never seen her walk. She's died a long, long time ago because we found footprints preserved in volcanic ash that likely belonged to several Australopithecines at the time. So she was found nearby. It's very unlikely that those footprints were left behind by any other species in the area. So we're pretty sure that she walked on 2 feet. And so that's that first step, pardon the pun, to becoming human, like us. After the Australopithecines, we have this genus Homo. Right? These are species that we truly do believe to be human. We even named them Homo because it means same as us. Right? They're the same species as us, or at least very, very similar to. So the first one is Homo habilis. Homo habilis was called handyman. He's the first member of our genus. Showed up about 2.4 million years ago, and he was called the handyman for a reason. He was the first primate species to use primitive stone tools. So again, we needed to take that step to get to our evolution, or to get to where we're at today, right? It takes a lot of cognitive ability and a lot of dexterity with that opposable thumb to use tools. So it's a pretty important step along the way. The next species that we're worried about is Homo ergaster. He would have showed up 1.8 million years ago and was around as long as 1.3 million years ago. The important thing about this species is that it was a hunter. This species would have followed migrating animals, and that really kind of explains, and it coincides with the spreading of our species out of Africa into Europe, and Asia. So following migrating animals, our species made its way out of where we started in Africa and started moving elsewhere. Okay, the next species of note is Homo erectus. It showed up 1.8 million years ago and was around as long as 400,000 years ago, had sophisticated tools and used fire. So this is the first instance in which we see a hominid species using fire and controlling that fire. And again, one more step towards becoming more and more modern. Homo erectus was the first one to use fire. That's what you need to remember for him. Otherwise, the next species on the list, Homo neanderthalis, is pretty famous as far as you've heard of Neanderthals, I'm sure, before. They're the most recent species aside from us. Obviously, they're extinct now, but they were around from 200,000 years ago to 30,000 years ago in Asia and Europe. They would have used fire again, constructed complex shelters. So that's a new thing for this species, that he made himself a home to live in. One thing of note as well with Neanderthals is they have evidence of culture, right? Meaning that they were going to do simple things like caring for their sick and burying dead. They probably had a basic language. We don't know that again because we've never been around to hear it, but we assume from evidence that we have that they did communicate with each other and that they'd have some kind of rudimentary language. It's also said that if a Neanderthal was alive today, we probably wouldn't really know the difference. They're very, very similar to our species, our current modern human species, and so probably could walk side by side with us and we wouldn't really know one from the other. So Neanderthals died out 30,000 years ago, but very, very similar to us today. Okay, so that brings us all the way to us in our evolution. We are Homo sapiens, right? Modern humans. Earliest known fossils are found in Ethiopia, that's in Africa, 195,000 years ago. So we actually started and lived around the same time as Neanderthals. And again, we just obviously were able to adapt and evolve a little bit better. We had that little bit of an advantage that led us to survive and them to die out. Obviously, there's a lot of special things about us, but one of the big things is that ability to use a wide range of resources in many different environments. We were the most suited to be able to adapt and survive as long as we have, because we're the only ones left, obviously. There's a definite trend towards a burgeoning culture. Modern culture appeared about 40,000 years ago with the Cro-Magnon man. So you'll probably see that name at some point or another. But you should understand that Cro-Magnon and human, Homo sapiens, really the same thing. Right? They're just the first ones to really show that modern culture, to have sophisticated tools. Right? There's also a marked enlargement of skull and brain size, so we were obviously getting a little bit smarter, had a little bit more cognitive ability. But each species on this list just kind of made their own mark and brought one more thing to the table to become us, right? To be as sophisticated as we are now. So again, we'll go through the list one more time, but it's really simple. Remember that Homo habilis, handyman, was the first one to use tools. Homo ergaster followed migrating animals, and that's how we kind of moved out of Africa into different continents. Homo erectus was the first one to use fire. So started cooking food and everything like that. Neanderthals, right, had that burgeoning culture. They used fire and constructed complex shelters. That shelters was the new thing, right? Plus the culture. And then finally you get all the way to us. modern humans, with everything that we do now, showed up near 200,000 years ago, and we've been around ever since. And hopefully we stick around for a while. All right, this is the end of these notes.